okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That's fine. Thank you. So are there any apologies, please?
No apologies received, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. So now we'll move to minutes of the previous meeting. And page 1, are there any issues? Page 2. Thank you. We'll take it those minutes are correct. Thank you. So now we'll move to the 2021 service plan mid-year reviews. And is it at this point I should invite Councillor Cochrane and Chris Humphreys as lead officer for adult social services, please?
Sorry, Chair, can I have the matters arising? It's Councillor Marshall.
Well, we just went through the minutes.
Sorry, I've just come in from another work meeting. Sorry, I'm just coming across.
Right. Were there any matters you wish to raise, Councillor Marshall?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to advise committee members, as I said I would last time, I had a response from the Chief Education Officer in response to the education equipment, such as like the laptops and tablets and things like that there. I did ask a question about mental health, and I'm assuming that answer is due to come. And as soon as I do get it, Chair, I will send it like the other answer to committee members.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. I do recall getting that information, which you forwarded to me, and I made the assumption that you would have forwarded it to all the committee members. So thank you for that. So now can we proceed to invite Councillor Cochrane, please?
Right, thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is the service plans for the mid-year reviews. I'd just like to make the one point that obviously when we're talking about this 5-year plan, since the 5-year plan was adopted, we have had cuts of over £12 million. And I just think that when you consider what we've achieved during this period, I think it's quite exceptional, and all credit to all the officers that have been involved in social services.
Councillor Cochrane, I'm ever so sorry to interrupt. Would you be able to put your camera on, please?
And will other members turn their cameras and their...
My camera is on.
We can't see you, Paul, unfortunately. And just to remind members that when they're not speaking, please turn off your camera and your chat function.
Now my camera's off. Now, is that on or off now? I
can't see you.
Right, now I've taken the line off. Is that on now?
Yes, you're here now with us.
All right, well, I hadn't touched it, so I don't know what happened then.
It's called technology, Councillor.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what the hell it is, to be honest. So can I ask Chris to go through obviously we'll go through the adults first of all, and then obviously Sally then will take us through the children's part of the reviews. So Chris,
yeah. So can everybody see me? I've got my everything on, hopefully. Yes. So I'm just going to take us through the kind of the mid-year review, because obviously there's quite a lot of information in the underlying service plan, but just to say this is about looking at the mid-year review. So in terms of the kind of the highlights, really, in terms of budgets, obviously we started the year position with a projected overspend, but now that has we've got an improved position in terms of our budget. That is partly supported by some additional funding we've had related to COVID, which is to support the kind of the care sector. So we has got some consequential funding supporting us at the moment, but overall, given the significant demands on adult social care, our budget position, I would say, is in a good place at the moment. In terms of risks that we've highlighted, obviously one of the risks is around the pressure on social services in terms of the demand, because people will understand that, you know, we're supporting a population that is gradually getting older, which is a good thing, but then more people will need our care and support as they move into older age. And also we've got more people who live longer, who with profound disabilities. So a lot of young people who previously may not have reached adulthood with significant and profound disabilities are now moving into adulthood and needing our intervention and support there as well. The other risk we've highlighted is around the stability of the social care providers, by which we mean care homes and domiciliary care. Domiciliary care is in a reasonably good place at the moment in Newport, but the care home sector has got quite a lot of vacant beds, partly COVID related, and there's also a reluctance for families to agree to their family members moving into residential care at the moment, because obviously it's been all over the news about the impact of COVID on some care homes. So quite a number of them have got quite a lot of vacancies, which obviously impacts on their financial sustainability. Now, at the moment, we have funding specifically from Welsh Government to keep that situation stable, and we are funding what we would call void beds. But when we get to the end of this financial year, we will have to, if there's no funding available in 2021-22, then we could see some care home struggle financially. We've obviously, the safeguarding risk is an ongoing challenge for us, and as at the moment we're seeing quite a significant increase in domestic violence, and also we've had a big increase in the number of people needing to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So those are some of the consequences of COVID. The Liberty Protection Safeguard risk, which is highlighted there. The Mental Capacity Act was reviewed and amended. It's a legal framework, and it's England and Wales piece of legislation. It's not specific to Wales. That was amended, and there were some quite significant changes to that act, which were due to be implemented this year, but now they have been delayed until April 2022. So I can give more detail on that if that's helpful. So just a few sort of highlights on my executive summary, and then I'm happy to answer questions. Just to reassure members that and Scrutiny that we are continuing to support all of our care homes and care providers during these challenging times. We obviously have been given responsibility for distribution of PPE and the financial support for the sector, as I've outlined. We've got a lot of challenges around hospital discharges to support people to safely leave hospital, and we've got a what we call a standard operating procedure in place so that no one will leave hospital and move into a care setting or to have care in their own home without a negative COVID test. We continue to have Home First at the front door, which is a regional service that Newport manages on behalf of all the partners in Gwent, so that people who don't need to be admitted to hospital for medical reasons can be supported to return home. Quite a number of those people we're finding arrive in hospital, are transported to hospital by ambulance as a result of a fall. So we're working with colleagues in reablement so that if you go back home, then you're followed up with reablement to make sure that the reasons for you falling in the first place are investigated and you're supported to hopefully not have any further episodes. We've also got arrangements in place with a range of third sector organisations to support people who are having to previously shield but currently are also are shielding, or even though the shielding arrangement has stopped, but people will be advised if they have underlying health conditions to continue to be extremely careful. So we're supporting those people with things such as medication and collecting their medication and shopping, etc. And also doing a lot of just supporting people with calls and because, you know, that a lot of people are very isolated and finding as this extends now into a longer period of time, it's difficult to manage. So I think those are the kind of the main. It's very, very busy, as I'm sure people won't be surprised about, and we're getting significant numbers of people contacting us. And there's been a lot of additional responsibility placed on adult social services by Welsh Government, which we're having to manage, including things like the £500 payment to care workers. We've had to administer and put all of that in place. And also, you know, supporting carers we've provided them with an emergency handbook, and we're doing regular virtual events to provide that kind of support to carers who are caring for their loved ones. Just to a couple of final points in terms of the performance information, so that for people's understanding, for members' understanding, we were in the process of changing the whole of the performance framework, which is set down by Welsh Government. We had a range of performance measures which are put in place after the Social Service and Wellbeing Act came into force. They're all in the process of being changed, which is why we haven't been able to sort of give a lot of detail around our performance against the Welsh Government indicators, because they were in the process of change and a lot of that work has now gone on hold. So just to explain why there's some gaps in that information. So I'm happy to answer any questions around the detail of the performance or some of the outcomes, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Ms Humphreys. I see that Councillor Routley has his hand raised. Councillor Routley, would you like to speak, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, both. I hope you're well, and thank you for the presentation. You've answered my first question, which is the liberty protection safeguarding legislation. I don't need you to answer any more on that. You've covered that. The next one is the pressure on adult and community services. I'm fully aware of joint working practices between yourselves and the NHS. But however, I notice that we are in an area of immediate action. So what are we doing now to mitigate taking us from the red into a more acceptable level? If you could sort of explain that. And I suppose if you could add safeguarding risks, stability of social services and services providers as well, that would sort of cover that area for me. Yeah, so in terms of the red, which particular red are you referring to? Is that the performance indicators? Sorry, I'm referring to all of it really. Okay. Because you're all in the red. Okay. In terms of the working in an integrated way with the NHS, there's been a lot of very close working, I would have to say, across all partners as a result of COVID, and a lot of strong relationships, I mean, have been further developed. We had good relationships to start with, which has helped us. We've, I think, as you know, the NHS is under very considerable pressure,
as a result of this further second wave of COVID. And I think it feels quite different to the first wave, because a lot of people who were in hospital in the first wave were younger, and actually they didn't necessarily need social services support to leave hospital. Once they were better, they were better. They were able to leave under their own steam. But because we are now heading into a winter period, which is always challenging for social services and for health, we're anticipating that there will be a greater number of people who will need our help to leave hospital. In the community, I would say that you may be aware that Newport did have 3 neighbourhood care networks previously. We've now moved to having 2 neighbourhood care networks, so an east and a west, which I think works much better for the population of Newport. And so we're building on and strengthening those relationships with colleagues in primary care, in other words, GPs, district nurses, etc. So there's a lot of work, and we have a programme of work which is called the Wellbeing Networks. So that's about supporting people in their communities and making sure that they have the skills and the resources they need to support themselves as much as possible. Obviously, one of the big challenges we've got on the horizon from a health perspective is the opening of the Grange Hospital, which is still planned for the 17th of November. And that logistically, as you can imagine, is a huge piece of work that the Health Board has to put in place to move all of those services around. It's a huge challenge in normal circumstances. It's a massive challenge in the middle of a pandemic. So we've got services aligned. So as I said, we already have Home First in the Royal Gwent and Neville Hall Hospital, and we will have Home First at the front door of the Grange as soon as it opens. So we work closely with our health colleagues to make sure that we're supporting that big change as much as we possibly can. In terms of safeguarding, obviously you will see from the performance that our performance around responding within 7 days remains very high. So our target is 90% and our outcome is about 98%. So we're doing some work also to improve the alignment between adult services and the safeguarding hub, which is piloted in Newport and is now going to be extended across Gwent over the next few weeks and months. I think the aim is, it was going to be November, but the aim is now January, so that we have greater access to that multi-agency discussion around, who is the best agency to respond to some of the safeguarding concerns that we receive, and a much more coordinated response. So that will improve things as well. So there's a lot of work, a lot of activity happening around that as well. And we will have, I think it's 6 police, Sally can confirm, I think with 6 police will be based in the Civic Centre to support the safeguarding hub. And that'll be happening from January.
Yes, I can confirm it will be 6, if not possibly 7 police officers who will now be based with us. They will be based in the Civic Centre on floor 2, and they will have access to the police databases from within the Civic, which is really useful. We currently have 1, sometimes 2 police officers with us, but obviously that's not sufficient to meet the needs for children, never mind adults. So this is a really positive development for us, and is a result of quite a long-term review that Gwent Police have undertaken of their public protection arrangements. I think, as Chris rightly says, it really will improve safeguarding across adults and children's for all of us. It just gives a depth to what we're able to offer in terms of really understanding across agencies what the risks are for individuals and for families. Thank you.
Isn't it true? Isn't it true, Sally, though, that because we were a pilot across Wales, and I think a lot of Wales now are possibly going to be adopting what we've established in Newport now with our safeguarding team.
I mean, we were the pilot. I mean, the other areas have undertaken similar pieces of work, but I mean, we were well ahead in relation to this piece of work with safeguarding, and we learnt quite a lot from colleagues in England who'd undertaken similar exercises before us. I think we've been really assisted by working with Gwent Police in this piece of work, and that's been an asset for us. I think it's also been timely because of the introduction of new safeguarding procedures across Wales, so we'll be able to fully work with partners to ensure the introduction of and the adoption of those procedures across all agencies, which is a plus. I think credit to Gwent Police. I think they've recognised that their previous model of having a centralised unit was perhaps not as effective as it might be, and so the dispersal of the resources across the 5 local authorities with Newport as a centre for Newport and Monmouthshire is really welcome from our perspective. But yes, you're right, Councillor Cochrane, we have taken a very early doors approach to this piece of work.
Can I come in here before I go to Councillor Cleverly? I think that is an excellent initiative, and I was going to be asking a question with regard to safeguarding and domestic violence. So I think that, you know, having police officers based within the civic centre with access to information from their police database, but working very closely with you as the authority should be helpful in supporting those victims of domestic violence. Thank you for that. Can I go now to Councillor Cleverly, please?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Janet.
Thank you. This is a question for Sally.
We were dealing with adult social care first.
Okay.
If you don't mind, Janet, but
yes.
Your question will be welcome when we come on to talk with Sally.
I have a question for Chris then.
Thank you.
I want to congratulate you through these extraordinary times we're going through. For all your staff, been amazing. Is everybody in the care homes okay? And I know they're well looked after. So
yeah. I've literally we have a twice weekly multi-agency meeting, which we call the closed setting meeting. So I've literally just come off that call now, and we monitor very, very carefully with infection control, environmental health colleagues, and Public Health Wales and the Nile and Bever Health Board. We've got a very careful monitoring system in place for the care homes and the outbreaks. Just to share literally from this morning's call, Welsh Government, we have a whole dashboard in terms of actually you know, making sure that people have got everything they need to keep their residents safe. So Welsh Government have acknowledged that and are asking us to share that as good practice across Wales. So there's, as people will recall, Newport was hit very badly very early on in terms of the impact on our care homes, and at that point we didn't have everything we needed to have in place, because why would we? And so we've been on a very steep learning curve, and we are now, you know, if we do have outbreaks, the support that's put into the individual care homes is second to none. And we are, you know, as I say, we've got an agreement in place with the health board that no one will be discharged into a care home that it hasn't had a negative test. So we're, you know, making sure that we're keeping them as safe as we possibly can. We do the numbers at the moment. We have got one care home. Obviously, I'm not going to share the names that has had a significant number of people who are positive. Luckily, very few of the residents have been symptomatic. We did have a couple of people who sadly passed away, but it was not, even though they will be counted as COVID related deaths because they were positive, they had significant underlying health conditions and were end of life. So, but there's an enormous amount of support going in to make sure that we keep people safe, and you know, our day services staff are now our kind of PPE managers and our PPE distributing, and so you know, we've all had to learn so much about lots of things that we never thought we'd have to learn about, and I think our relationships with the care homes in Newport has always been strong. It's always been very positive, and so we get sort of at least twice weekly phone calls to all of our care providers to make sure that they're managing and to see if there's anything else, any support that they need. So yeah, it's
Thank you, Chris.
I hate to touch wood, but at the moment things are very relatively stable in Newport. Things are on some other areas are really struggling, but things are okay.
And well done to yourself and all your staff.
Thank you.
Just if I may, on the back of Councillor Cleverly's question, are your staff with these additional pressures, how are they being cared for?
Well, obviously we've got a lot of, you know, we do have access to occupational health and you know, counselling advice should any staff really struggle, because there are some staff, a lot of staff who are working from home. That sounds ideal, but for some staff that creates additional pressures, doesn't it? Because they may have caring responsibilities for themselves. They may not have a home environment that is conducive to being able to work from home. So we need to, you know, we're supporting staff. We have developed a kind of a risk assessment so that individually staff can be risk assessed to make sure that, you know, they if they need to be self-isolating or shielding themselves, and we can fast track our staff to be tested should anybody need to be tested. We've actually had very few, a handful of staff who have tested positive, and everybody who needs access to PPE has access to PPE so that they can safely go and do both their assessments in the community and obviously within our in-house services within the care homes as well. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I ask now Councillor Townsend, please?
Oh yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry.
That's all right.
It's just a question to Chris about. She mentioned domestic violence before, and people being sectioned under the Mental Health Act.
Yeah.
Chris, how does what sort of numbers are we talking about in each case, and how does it compare with last year or the year before?
I haven't got the numbers for, I can get you the numbers in terms of the increase of referrals for domestic violence, but we have seen an increase in the numbers of safeguarding concerns that are related to, I can find it probably if I've got too many pieces of paper. Okay. But there has been an increase both in Sally's world for children, safeguarding incidents related to domestic violence, and also in the adults world as well. We have seen an increase. In terms of mental health, the number of section requests has gone up by 1/3.
Wow, that's quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
And does that include children, Chris, or will Sally?
No, that's adults.
Just adults, right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I now ask Councillor Stephen Marshall, please?
Thank you, Chair, and also would like to repeat comments from colleagues about the service and appreciation to the staff and everything doing such a good job. Thank you. My question is in relation to how we have had to change and adapt, and just want to know where we're looking at in the long term / medium term, short term future, and about what services we've had to provide up before March, and then what we're looking at in the future, and will that change significantly as we're moving across in this new COVID world, and how, please?
I think we, as you would understand, a lot of our services have continued as usual. So we, you know, in terms of our in-house care homes, and obviously the frontline social work and occupational therapy teams have had to continue as normal. A lot of our staff in the assessment teams are working from home, but they will be, you know, coming into the office as and when needed, which at the moment, because obviously we're in further restrictions at the moment, is not encouraged. But that's a council-wide policy. One of the things that has changed is our in-house day services and some of the day services that we commission from providers, because for obvious reasons, there's a caution in actually bringing those groups of people who have underlying health conditions together. And so we're supporting those people in different ways by doing supporting people both at home and in the community, rather than bringing them together into a more of a building-based services. So that's been working really well. Obviously, as we head into the winter, that may be more challenging to do, because obviously access in the community will not be so easy when the weather is colder and wetter. So we're sort of looking at how we can continue to support those people in different ways, but it has been quite well received. I think the cabinet member would be the first to want to raise concerns about the impact on family carers, particularly older carers, where they may, you know, and I think we've seen that over time. Initially, your families were quite happy to provide more care themselves. I think now that people are not able to sustain that over this extended period of time, so we're now finding that a lot of care is having to put back in, both into people's own homes and potentially people moving into having respite care. But all of that we were able to facilitate, and we were able to sort of meet the current demands on our service without any undue delays. So that's really positive. Longer term, I think it's about building on what we've learned and maybe having a more flexible approach to how we support people. And, you know, again, you know, I think there's pros and cons of having a kind of a very mobile, dispersed, flexible workforce. So I think it's about making sure that we support people to be able to sort of do their job in the best way they can, really. And certainly, you know, things like bringing people together for team meetings and things are really important, but we have to be very cautious about doing that at the moment, because we've got to make sure that we're minimising the impact on the workforce. Because if our own workforce have to start, you know, isolating or hopefully not getting, you know, more cases of COVID in the workforce, as I said, we've had tiny numbers so far, then we need to be very, very cautious and very careful for the next few months at least.
Chair, can I just come in and just add one point that Chris raised about carers? Because obviously, I think you've heard me say it before. In 20 years' time, the average is going to be people reaching the age of 100 is going to be about 40,000. Now, obviously, some of these are not all going to be in residential homes. They're going to be living at home with their children. Well, their children are going to be in their 70s or 80s, looking after someone who is 100. And I think we got to be really mindful of social services, not just in Newport, across the country, that our carers need total support. And it's you know, we take it for granted sometimes, a lot of us, that people are caring, and we say as long as they're happy there, they're doing it. But those carers are going to need a hell of a lot of support in the future.
I think it's worth noting, Paul, that carers have always been taken very much for granted.
Yeah, yeah.
They haven't always had the support that's necessary for them to be able to continue. And you make a very good point that in the future, things will not be better, they will be worse. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, in that respect.
And even the carers allowance, is less than unemployment benefit, and they're looking after someone 24/7.
I know. Anyway, we need to move on now. And can I ask Councillor Richards, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In the Cabinet Members' preamble, Councillor Cochrane, he mentioned that the 5-year plan, there have been cuts of £12 million, and yet the service has still survived. I think if that's a fact, it's an important fact, and that should be included in the first paragraph of this report, so it's not forgotten. The second point I would raise, Chris mentioned in her report, funding void beds in care homes.
Yeah.
That sparked a light bulb in my mind. I should know what, but is that what is the process and procedure on that? It's not just a question of a residential care home owner filling in a form and applying, I have got so many beds vacant, and send me the money. What is the system there?
Yeah, it's a very robust system, because we have to put in a claim to Welsh Government that has to be signed off by our Section 151 officer. So we need to make the information is very robust, but essentially it is, and it's something that we monitor as a matter of course anyway. So they have to provide us with a number of people. Currently, we know the number of beds that are registered, and how many people are currently resident in that care home, and they have to provide us with that information, and then we submit that to Welsh Government.
Can I just remind colleagues, please, when you're not speaking, turn off your camera and turn off your chat function, because that aids, it helps improve no background noise. Right, Councillor Marshall, please. Your question. I see your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chair, again. My question just relates to the budgetary side of things and also performance measures. So it's a two-part question. So the first part is, obviously, over time we're experiencing difficulties with keeping within the budget. So I just want to confirm where we currently stand, obviously, with the whole situation with COVID-19, where we stand. Is there going to be challenges moving ahead with the budget, or is there other things in place that we know are fully, put in from other support services? And the part of it was the performance measures. Now, I know in previous meetings that we spoke about the fact that they were put on hold because there was further discussion about what performance measures were going to happen, and just want to hear from the officer or officers if you feel like now we do have proper performance measures that we feel challenge enough but are suitable for what we need to be performing against. Thank you.
So in terms of the budget, as mentioned on page 2 of the mid-year review, our budget projection at the moment is basically close to having a balanced budget. I think it's very difficult in the current circumstances it's exceptionally difficult to actually forecast the budget this year, because we're in unprecedented times. We have got some consequential additional funding from Welsh Government, which is specifically targeted at supporting the care sector. And we don't know at the moment, obviously, if that money will continue into next year. And as we all know, a lot could change next year because there are assembly elections. So at the moment, what I'm able to say is that actually we have got a balanced budget. We, over the last 2 years, we have, it's not been easy, but we have managed to come in reasonably close to our budget, given the scale of the budget and the demands upon it. But that means, what that means in terms of the background is a lot of, I suppose, the nice to haves have now gone out, and the budget is very much 100% targeted on what we must do. There's no frills, if I can describe it in that way. In terms of your question about performance, Councillor Marshall, I think when the Social Services and Wellbeing Act came in, they had a lot of performance measures in there, which in retrospect they've realised didn't actually tell you very much. A very good example of that would be the average age of someone moving into a care home. And that was the average was then from 18 plus. Well, of course, if you have someone who's 40 moving into a care home and on a long-term basis, that completely throws out your average. So I think, you know, the benefit of hindsight, they've realised that a lot of these performance measures need to be looked at again to make them much more relevant to what we actually need to understand about how the service is managing and if it's achieving its performance targets. So there's been a huge amount of work happening and engagement activity happening, both with officers, but also with you know, with particular groups of people in terms of what do they want to see in terms of our performance measures. Obviously, people and families with learning disability, the carers. So all of those views have been taken into account, and you know, a massive amount of work has been done to make these measures more relevant. So and also meaningful, really. So hopefully, once we're in a position to, we'll be able to put those measures in place. One of the delays, because as you can imagine, all of this information has to be extracted from our systems. So the numbers look quite straightforward, but actually being able to extract the information and make it comparable across 22 authorities is a big challenge. But I'm confident that you know, we've been closely involved in this work, and that we're in a good position to be able to put the changes and the measures in place when they're finally signed off.
Thank you. Oh yes, I had my hand up. Chris, I don't know whether in your talking with the health colleagues, I'm hearing you say that reablement is good, and that's a very good thing, given older people are susceptible to falls. Yeah. But I recently have had at least 2 calls from residents following falls who've been able to get help from the GP surgeries. Oh, the GP surgeries are only offering, it would seem, over the telephone consultations. And these older people are terrified to go to hospital in case they catch COVID. Yeah. Now this, then they're phoning me asking for my help and assistance. And of course, in my capacity as a counsellor, I can't actually give them that practical help that they need. So I think this is a message that needs to go to your health colleagues, because this will store up problems for social care in the future. Not to mention the fact that here we've got elderly people suffering, pain,
Yeah.
and distress, and it's not being addressed.
No. But the GP should be referring them into the frailty fall service. That's what they should be doing. But yeah, but I can email you about that if it's helpful.
That would be helpful. Thank you very much. And I think it's something that perhaps we could put on the agenda when you and I meet for the briefing.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, oh, I see now Councillor Trevor Watkins, please, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A number of questions. In regards to the budget, you're still predicting, what was it, 800,000 gain by the end of Q4. Is that right?
An underspend.
Underspend, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, what concerns me with the underspend, not only that, but with the pressures which you've got on the probability graph, regards to the adult services, the pressures on the adult and community services and the stability. Yeah. How are you going to get those back down to an amber or yellow or even a green with a bit of luck if you've got that underspend? And the other question is the figures which you've got on the corporate risk graph, whatever you like to call it.
Yeah.
At the moment, it starts 16, 16, 20, 20. I take it the higher the number, the greater the risk?
Correct.
Right. Okay. So that means that the liberty protection has actually gone up and the pressure in community. How are you going to reduce those to be able to bring those down to I won't say an acceptable level, because 0 is the acceptable level, but better than what it is at the moment?
Yeah, I think I suppose, although the 800,000 is a significant amount of money, that can change in the blink of an eye given the sort of demand on the service and the scale of the service. So it's pretty close to a balanced budget in many ways.
Yes.
I think in terms of one of the pressures, I think it's an ongoing challenge, to be honest. I think because the whole of a lot of adult services is managing the demand at the front door, because as you can imagine, we have a lot of people who present to us with a whole range of challenges, and it's making sure that no one that we meet their needs in the most timely way and in the most expedient way, if that makes sense, in terms of, you know, what service do they need. So reablement's a really good example of that, because if someone has a period of reablement, hopefully if we get it right, they don't need then a long-term care package, or the point at which they may need a long-term care package is delayed into the future. So a lot of it is about how we manage that demand and those pressures on the front door. So we've got, it's related to the safeguarding conversation as well. So we've got a whole range of services aligned at our front door now. It's a multifunctional service. So we've got occupational therapy, we've got housing support. So for example, some of the more vulnerable people in our communities, many of them are known to housing support colleagues. So it's bringing all of that information and intelligence together. And we also have sensory loss specialists at the front door. So it's making sure we can direct people to the most appropriate service for them at the earliest opportunity. So that's how we manage the pressure question. I think in terms of bringing it down, I don't know, it is a constant challenge, I have to say. Stability of providers, I think, as we've said, we're carefully monitoring the situation, very carefully monitoring the situation. And I suppose the great unknown is what will happen when we come out of the end of COVID, which we're not in a position to predict at the moment. And the safeguarding, as we were saying earlier, one of the things we're doing about that to bring that risk down is developing the MASH with our colleagues, with the police, so that we are sharing that intelligence through, as soon as a safeguarding concerns come in, we can share that intelligence about who knows these families and these individuals, and what can we do to safeguard them. So that's something that we are doing to reduce that risk. And the liberty protection safeguards, we already now know that that's going to be delayed until 2022. So, but one of the things that we are doing to prepare for that is that we are committed to training. We will have to have a specialist workforce. That's a requirement in the Act to respond to requests for safeguarding people, because we are in effect depriving people of their liberty. So there's a new specialist role being developed. So as part of our preparation, we won't have more resources as far as we know at the moment, but we are providing people with training in advance of the Act coming in. So once it comes in, we will already have people with the right skills to be able to take up those specialist roles. Right. So just to give you an example of some of the work that's happening.
Two small quick questions as well. PPE, are you having any difficulties acquiring that? And if so, everything seems to be fine, then you're getting it okay. The other question is, oh God, forgotten it. No, it's gone. The other question.
It'll come back.
I'll have to come back to you.
Yeah.
Don't worry, whatever it happens to us all.
To answer your question about PPE, we have got more than sufficient supplies of PPE. The modelling Welsh Government have done around demand for PPE, and I sit on the Welsh Government group looking at this, is the modelling is on the worst case scenario demand for PPE. So we have got more than adequate supplies of PPE. It's not an issue at all.
Okay, the other question was in regards to the budget, the underspend, the funding from Welsh Government, have that helped our budget in any way?
Yes, it has, yeah.
Good, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I see that Councillor Richards has his hand up, please. Go ahead. John, you're muted.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, two points arising from the report. Earlier we were told that there's a new safeguarding team and system being established at the Civic Centre. Could it, at some stage, the details of that and the contact numbers be circulated to all elected members? Because we get, you know, complaints and points raised with us. And the second one, you mentioned a frailty fall system that you were going to write to the chairman about. Could you send that to all committee members?
Yeah.
Again, I've had instances of members in my ward who had that situation. Thank you very much.
That's absolutely fine.
Okay. Well, I think I can't see anyone else with a hand raised at present, so I think that probably covers all the questions we have for you at this point, Chris. And can I say thank you very much for your engagement and for the information that you've given us. And on behalf of everybody on the panel, yes, a big thank you to all your staff for all their hard work, please. Thank you.
I'll second that, Chair.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So now I think we have to say good morning to Sally, please.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sally.
Good morning, Bore da.
Would you like to? Yes, please feel free to give us your report.
An overview. Okay, so obviously, just like with Chris, you've had the report in advance and hopefully had a chance to look and to consider some questions ahead of time. But just to pick up on a couple of points in the report, I think I'll probably go in a similar order to Chris, and I'll start with the budget. The Children's Services budget is mistitled actually in this report. It's labelled Adult and Community Services, and on page 55 it's not Adult and Community Services, it's the Children's Services budget. And we're currently forecasting somewhere in the region of £1 million overspend. Now, the majority of that is almost exclusively on placements for children, and we have previously discussed at length in this scrutiny and indeed in others the challenges of providing suitable placements for children. We, like most local authorities, are struggling with a market in placements which is very much driven by providers. We have done an exceptional amount of work in this area, as many will be aware, in terms of building our own residential children's homes, in terms of enhancing our foster carer payment scheme, and indeed have continued access with foster carers. But nonetheless, it is an area that is a constant challenge to us, and hence the forecast overspend. We are aware that Welsh Government made an announcement last week. The Deputy Minister made an announcement of additional funding for children's services in relation to COVID. We have already had some additional funding which covered us, for example, for agency staff in our own children's homes, in the same way as some things were covered in adults over the summer when we were particularly stretched. This additional funding we anticipate will be rather different, but nonetheless it should assist us, we will hope, in the way that we're able to manage our budget. I just wanted to pick up very quickly some elements from my overview. Obviously, just like with adults, this has been a time of unprecedented working in children's services for very different reasons. And I think whilst rightly and understandably the emphasis has been on adult services to a large extent, the pressures on children's services shouldn't be underestimated. We've seen an increasing number of referrals and some degree of complexity in those referrals. And yet, despite that, we have continued to manage the numbers of looked after children, I think, safely and effectively. Again, like in the adults world, I mean, in an odd way, when we talk about recovery in children's services, I'm not sure what we're recovering, because almost everything that we did before continued. Our children's homes remained open, we continue supporting our foster carers, we continue to recruit foster carers, we continue to place children for adoption, we continue to offer families extensive support throughout this period, and we continued to investigate child protection. The courts remained open throughout and still do so. So while some of our methodology of how we undertake our work has changed, actually not a great deal has in fundamental ways in terms of our support for families. I just wanted to touch on, it was mentioned in the report, is that last December, so well, almost coming up to a year ago, Newport City Council was part of a joint inspection. It was a joint inspection of the child protection arrangements for Newport, and it was the first of a pilot form of inspection for the inspectorates. So this involved Care Inspectorate Wales, Health Inspectorate Wales, Estyn, Her Majesty's Inspectorate for Probation, and Her Majesty's Inspectorate for Constabulary. So the 5 inspectorates visited us. It felt like an eternity. I'm assured it was only a week, but it felt much longer than that. And they looked overall at our arrangements across agencies for child protection, with a particular emphasis on exploitation. The publication of that report was delayed because of COVID, but it was eventually published. And I think there are some real positives in that report in terms of how we in Children's Services have adopted a range of approaches to work with children in Newport, and how we across agencies have worked together. I mean, when you look at the plan, and obviously just as with adults and as with everybody else in the council, we wrote this plan at a time when COVID was unknown to any of us. And yet when I look back on it, when I was looking at the review, I suppose what is really pleasing is how many of the parts of the plan we have been able to advance. So we have been able to grow our family group conferencing service. We have been able to develop some of our services for care leavers. And that's despite the somewhat annoying advent of COVID in all of our worlds, or rather more tragic advent in all of our worlds. In terms of performance, I would reiterate what Chris has already said, is that obviously there was a significant delay in us receiving the performance framework, and we are still working through quite how that will look across children's services in terms of how we collect all of that information. So, for example, I'll give you one example of a new addition to the performance framework in children's, which is the number of children referred to us, which is linked to the abolition of the defence of reasonable chastisement, which members will be aware was passed by the National Assembly shortly before COVID. We don't currently have an effective way to capture that in our referrals, and that is something we will need to develop. I just wanted to pick up on the risks very quickly. I mean, again, I suppose just like adults, the biggest single risk for us is the pressure on delivery of services. So again, it's the amount of work that's just quite simply coming through the door, and how we continue to manage that. And we can't stop, we can't cease delivering the services or supporting the people we do, so we have to carry on. And clearly that has been a particular challenge over the past 8 months. Again, we had relatively few staff absences, and certainly by the summer we had full staff complement back and well. I have to say that we are starting to see more staff going off again, either needing to self-isolate because of exposure to a member of their family or a friend, to somebody who's had a positive test, or because they themselves have had a positive test for COVID. And whilst that's not impacting directly on our service delivery at the moment, it's something that we're going to need to watch very carefully. Whilst that's acute in terms of our day-to-day services, obviously the area where that has most impact in our children's homes. So we've had to keep a really careful eye on how we manage our staff and how we support our staff throughout this period. I think the other 2 risks that I'd want to highlight for you are the family courts. Is that, again, members may well be aware from national press coverage that there are considerable pressures across the court estate at the moment, in relation to family court and criminal court, and that does impact us in terms of delays and in terms of how we work with the court virtually, which has been challenging. And then the last element is in terms of historical claims against the local authority, which is a risk that we've highlighted. We obviously do, like many agencies, there is a possibility of claims against the local authority for historical abuse and historical inaction, and that can still be a challenge for us, particularly financially, in terms of them needing to pay. So those are the risks that I've highlighted. Obviously, I'm very happy to take any questions or any comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sally. And I see that Councillor Routley has his hand up. Councillor Routley, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions, and good morning to you first. Objective 3, under the ensured range of placements that are available for looked after children, it's still quite alarming when I read things such as the breadth of placements have led to a very strong provider market with very poor outcomes for children. What are we doing first off to ensure better outcomes for children?
Good morning, Councillor Routley. So in relation to the range of placements, we, like all local authorities, struggle with the provider market. So this is a national issue across the whole of the UK. It's not a Wales issue. It's certainly not a Newport issue. But in relation to improving outcomes for our children, what we've very clearly done in Newport is made a very proactive decision to develop our own children's residential care and to enhance the type of care that we then offer our children. That's one element of it. Members will be aware that we previously opened Rose Cottage, and that we're shortly due to open a further children's home, Rosedale. Now, what that means for us is that rather than having to use the provider market, we're able to care for children ourselves. And whilst obviously the provider market is important, but being able to provide that care ourselves does give us a greater level of control. The other thing that we've done very deliberately to improve the outcomes of the children in our care is that in those children's homes is to focus on the nature of the care and to ensure very much that that's a trauma-informed, attachment-focused approach to care, very much with the aim of improving outcomes. More widely, in terms of ensuring outcomes for looked after children across the whole population of our children, not just our children in residential care, we have access to St David's Day Fund, which we use very much. It's colloquially called the Bank of Mum and Dad, basically. So that's for those extras for our looked after children. So that's for those little things that perhaps we wouldn't routinely be able to provide. We're able to provide using that fund. And my understanding is that in the statement from the Deputy Minister last week, there will be additional funding for us specifically for care leavers to improve their outcomes. You may have noticed in the report, Councillor Routley, last year we ran a very successful work placement scheme. Now, that's not been possible this year for obvious reasons, which I think we were really sad about because it was a big success last year. I would hope that that's something in some form or another we'll be able to develop further into the future. I've also read this morning, for example, throughout this period, we put in place additional support for our foster carers, because obviously anticipating is in the same way as for all carers, to suddenly be in the position in March of lockdown, often with quite vulnerable and challenged children, was very difficult. I mean, actually what we found is that a number of our foster carers found it a period of quiet and a period of reflection, and some of the pressure on their children was less, which is interesting. We did put in substantial additional support throughout, and we've tried to ensure that our communication with our foster carers has remained open all the way through this period. And I suppose the final element of that is that just as we went into lockdown, Cabinet approved a substantially increased financial package for our foster carers, which is welcome. So there's a whole wealth of things that go around this in terms of improving outcomes. It's not one thing, it's many, and I suppose I've just scraped the surface in describing some of those for you, Councillor Routley. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Paul, were you?
Yeah, could I just add obviously a lot of these children of care is the court proceedings really have determined what these children have got to find, and that's why we've started developing our own homes. And when you think about the budget, what Sally mentioned before about £1 million, we're hoping to get about 12 children back, something like that, isn't it, Sally? Now, we save about £100,000, and I know that's a bit cynical really on the financial side of things, but it's a big, that's nearly £1 million we would be saving by bringing those children back home. Also, it's going to be better for the children, so we are doing that. And on the foster caring, you know, that extra finance, we're having more foster carers coming in. We've got a lot that we're reviewing now at the moment for that are in the waiting room, so to speak, and going to be brought on board. Now, the more we can have in foster carers, giving them a home in Newport, is great, and that's going to help us tremendously going to the future, because this looked after children, I know it goes into red, but I think there's an argument that's saying, you know, we're protecting children when they come into care because we can't leave them where they're at. So when we have people, and even the minister, I did object, and I made that clear. We had a letter saying that, you know, your looked after children numbers are high. Not just this authority, but other authorities. We're actually a bit stable, so that's quite good on that side of things. But, you know, we are protecting children when we do bring them into care, so we shouldn't be sort of be admonished for that reason by bringing children into care, because we are protecting them. Thank you.
My second question is actually on the projected £1 million overspend. That projection, what impact is that going to have on the delivery of service? And also, what are we doing to mitigate any future impact? Because somebody has to find this overspend, and I'm just worried that it could have a knock-on effect. There could be a consequence of just accepting this £1 million as is projected. It could go higher.
We never just accept it. I absolutely assure you, it's sleepless nights are many, but this is one of the things that gives me sleepless nights. I mean, obviously across the council as a whole, we look to balance the budget, and we are working with our colleagues in finance and across the board. It is a really difficult issue for us in terms of placements and how we manage it. As I've described, we are undertaking significant work to mitigate that overspend, and the monitoring that's involved in that on a week by week basis is extensive. No child comes into our care without the most extensive set of oversights, and similarly, no child comes into a placement without commissioning overseeing the process for contracting that placement if it's an external placement. So we have in place those safeguards in terms of children coming in to try to ensure that we have to absolutely ensure that we have a monitoring of that. We have an understanding of our looked after children and the pressures that are within that. It is really difficult. You cannot anticipate the child that suddenly turns up on our doorstep, and we have to care for them. That's not a choice. We have a statutory duty to care for those children. So we have to keep doing that, and we have to keep managing it. I'm not going to underestimate how hard this is. It is difficult and it is a constant challenge. But I suppose all I can say in mitigation is that we constantly monitor. We constantly look, not just locally, but regionally, nationally and beyond, at steps that we can take to try to mitigate the costs. And we work very closely with our colleagues in finance and commissioning to do that work. Thank you.
Thank you. You've answered a couple of the questions I wanted to ask Sally, but I will come to one in terms of safeguarding. And it really is good to hear that you are now working much more closely with more police officers in respect of safeguarding. Are you aware of Operation Encompass?
Yes, absolutely aware, and it is fully enacted across Gwent.
Well, I'm asking that question, I know, because I was instrumental in getting that off the ground. So it's really good for me to hear that those children, when they've been at risk, subjected to an episode, are being supported by notifying the school. I take it that you are aware of it too, Paul. Yes?
I was on mute, I was. Yes, yes, I was, yes.
Yes, thank you. Just one more thing. Children on the, what has been the impact of COVID on children on the protection register?
We've seen an increase in the number of children on the child protection register. I mean, we do a weekly report into Welsh Government. We do a report every Monday, and we have seen an increase over this period in the number of children on the child protection register. Not surprisingly. I mean, it would have been astonishing if we'd seen a decrease. Children's names come off where families have been able to work very effectively with us, but sadly there's been an overall increase in numbers. And you touched on it in the discussions with Chris. Obviously we saw less so in recent weeks, but over the summer and the spring we saw an increase in the number of referrals to us because of domestic abuse. We do have some access to some specialist service, both for children and for adults in relation to domestic abuse, but we can't get away from the fact that that has a very significant impact on children's lives. And we also saw families, I mean, again, no surprise on this, families who just quite simply found the whole period of lockdown, some of the financial challenges that we're beginning to see coming through in terms of impacting on families, the pressures for families. It's all very well if you live somewhere safe and warm and with access to a garden, but if you don't, obviously the period from March through until the end of the lockdown was extremely difficult for many families. And then we also saw for families with teenagers in particular, I think some of the difficulties about caring for teenagers who very naturally want to be out and about, they want to be with their mates and so on, and those were difficult. And then the other group that we increasingly saw over the summer were disabled children. So the families of disabled children, where again we were able to put in additional support, but that's a group, and Oaklands has been open throughout this period. We've continued to offer short breaks all the way through, but nonetheless it's a group that we're very aware of the pressures on those children.
And can I just add, Chair, that obviously we haven't seen the real fallout of all this, because obviously it's when they get back to school, we start hearing different things that have happened to those children we might not be aware of. It's only when they start talking in school. So that's why it's crucial that education are involved in the safeguarding side of things to make sure that we're aware of that. But I think it's what's going to happen in the future. We really don't know where that's all going to end, really, with the children.
No, and I do understand that, because here we are now in a short-term lockdown in Wales and a further lockdown coming on stream in England. And we're also looking at the possibility of more lockdowns in the future. So there are real concerns around that. But thank you for that. Councillor Marshall, please. You got a question?
Yes, I do, Chair. Thank you. That was one of my questions, actually, that was answered, but I'll ask the other ones. Obviously, seeing on corporate parenting in this committee, we speak a lot about the adoption and also the fostering services, and know obviously court services and processes also take into place, and about us going into homes and stuff, double checking whether or not they're safe places. Just want to know, within the current situation of COVID-19, if that has been affected, delayed, anything like that, and what effect does that have on the services moving forward? And then the other one, which noted on page 89 in the report, I can't remember what it was on the actual other number, but noted about the concerns about claims against the service from past times upon delivery, and just want to know kind of where we stand and what the expectations are moving forward, and will that have an effect obviously on the budget and where we stand as basically as a council? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. So the first part of that question about corporate parenting, adoption, fostering and work in the courts, I suppose I'll take them slightly separately. So right at the beginning of this period, so at the end of March, the National Adoption Service issued guidance across Wales for working safely. So two elements to that. Firstly, people have continued to be approved as adopters throughout this period. And what the National Adoption Service and then our regional adoption service, the South East Wales Adoption Service, have done is that they have adapted. Much of that work has been done virtually, but nonetheless, obviously some elements of that you can't. So that has been done in person using PPE, meeting outside and so on. And we have very much continued to match and place children for adoption. We've got, I think, what we could describe as a robust risk assessment for carrying out the transitions for children from foster care to adoptive placements during even periods of lockdown. We moved a child to adoptive carers this weekend. So even in the midst of all of this, those elements of work have very much continued. We've had to, I suppose, just as with adults, we've had to kind of find slightly new ways to do some things. But overall, we've continued with the work in exactly the same way as we would have done before. Obviously, I mean, just already today, I send a weekly email to all of my staff, so all of the Children's Services staff, and we update every week on the various changes. Well, obviously, in the coming week, except for work reasons, you can no longer travel to England. But for us, placing a child for adoption is for a work reason. So that work will continue for us. We've put in place all sorts of measures. Foster carers and adopters have had to self-isolate for 14 days each before the first matching meeting takes place. We've had to have people tested. We've had to carry out all sorts of ways to ensure this process is safe for all involved, but adoption has very much carried on. In terms of fostering, I think fostering is interesting. I think perhaps many people during the last 7 to 8 months have had an opportunity to reflect on their lives and what's important and what matters to us. But we've actually seen an increase in the number of inquiries we have for fostering, which came as something as a surprise, probably related to a lot of the work that our comms colleagues have done over the period. We have a new website, but also, as I and Councillor Cochrane have already mentioned, the increased package of support that we have for foster carers. So we've continued to assess, we've continued to support, and we've continued to approve foster carers. And, you know, just by way of, I suppose, an example, I sign off all recommendations from the fostering panel, and very often within days we have children placed with those carers. So that process has continued robustly. And then in relation to the second question, which was concerns about claims against the service, which is highlighted as a risk, it's very, very difficult to forecast what may happen in the future as a result of things that took place 30, 40 years ago and what that might mean. We work closely with our colleagues in insurance on this area to look at how we process those claims against the local authority and how they're managed. But it is highlighted as a risk for the reason that it is a risk. We can't really foresee what may come at us at any point in terms of looking at it. We do have an increasing number of requests from the police to look at past records, and we have just a couple of staff working on that at any one time, looking at old records and looking at claims against the local authority, and very often not claims, but people wishing to have information about the past and to understand what's happened to them, and that is an important part of the service that we offer. But I wouldn't, Councillor Marshall, like to give you false reassurance that this is something that I can say, no, it's not a problem. We wouldn't have highlighted as a risk. It is a risk for the service. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Councillor Can I just remind colleagues, please turn off your chat function and your video in order to improve the background, less background noise. Councillor Cleverly. Go ahead. You're muted, Janet.
Is that better?
That's fine now.
Thank you. Morning, Sally. Well done for you and your staff for these extraordinary times that we're going through. And also for all the inspections that you've had, because I've done it, Estin, and I know how bad that is. So to do all the others as well, amazing, well done. I think some of my questions have been answered because I was noticed that the Child Protection Register was in the red and the increase in that, and you've already gone into that. And excellent, there's more foster carers. I was going to mention that as well. The one thing I wanted to mention was when we were in lockdown with the young people, was there a real problem and difficulty in keeping them in? Because I know we've had tremendous problems in Bettis.
Yeah. I mean, yes, there were challenges. There were challenges across the city, realistically, in terms of, for some young people, being shut in really was very, very hard indeed. There were a number of things that we did across the local authority to try to ameliorate some of that, some of which you may be aware of. So in partnership with our colleagues in education and regeneration, we did have access to the childcare hubs for vulnerable children, which was really important and really helpful. And then we also, over the summer, we had some additional funding from Welsh Government. I mean, this was over the summer holiday period, but we ran really extensive schemes over the summer targeting children who were vulnerable for whatever reason. Some of those, the majority of those came through children's services, but some of those were also referred through other routes. So, for example, through education. And we had some really positive feedback about those schemes in terms of assisting children and young people with focused activity. And it wasn't, certainly in the summer and even in the hubs, it wasn't sort of focused sitting activity. It was activity for children and young people, sporting activity, opportunities, those types of things to try and kind of preoccupy them and keep them busy. Our Youth Justice Service did some great work really early on. They all the children who were at that time on orders with us, we had to refocus some of the community work that they were doing. So they, for example, were very involved in putting together pamper backpacks for staff from the Gwent, which was a great piece of work. So that was a sort of positive to come out of it. But the double in that for us was about keeping children and young people busy. It was challenging. And I suppose we were concerned over this period because obviously we've had Halloween and we've got bonfire night this week, which are always kind of flashpoints for antisocial behaviour. We've not seen as much over this period. We've not seen we had anticipated a greater number of referrals into the home. We haven't seen that. We've actually seen a reduction. So I'm hoping that the torrential rain has rather deterred people, and I'm kind of hoping for some rain on Thursday night, if I'm honest. But yes, it continues. I don't want to be a killjoy, but rain around bonfire night would help immensely, basically. So yeah, it has been difficult, and I think a number of steps have been taken, but it's hard.
The other question I was going to ask is about the mental health of young people, because we work with CAMS, don't we?
Yeah. A big sigh then from my side.
It has been a really difficult time, and even so for young people.
And I think Councillor Cochrane touched on it when he mentioned we don't know yet. I mean, we've seen the implications for some children about what this period has meant. We responded very proactively to the Children's Commissioner survey for how children were feeling, and we had a fantastic response from children in Newport to that survey about how children were feeling during this period. And more recently, we've done a piece of work with children who are looked after, and we've done an art competition with them about what do they think of COVID and whatever. And whilst that's been very illuminating, it's also been heartbreaking. And some of the level of restriction that children have seen on their lives, and the level of change, and the level of anxiety and fear, and you can't minimise that. I think that what we may see in the future is perhaps what worries me more than in the immediacy. I think we can deal with what's in front of us now, and we can manage that from a children's services perspective. What concerns me more is perhaps a year, 18 months down the line, and the opportunities that many children and young people will have missed out on because of COVID, and then also how they've managed to deal and process with those things, which are a challenge for adults to manage and process, never mind children and young people. There are a number of initiatives that are taking place to try to assist with children and young people with mental health, but it's not now that I'm worried. It's, as I say, down in the future and how. And I suppose perhaps what's incumbent on us is to really keep that and hold that as something that we need to be looking out for with children and young people in the future.
Okay, thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
Sally, I think you're absolutely right, but can I suggest that anonymously, of course, that survey be sent out to corporate parents so that the corporate parents have an understanding of how children have been and are being affected?
The Children's Commissioner published that survey. They published that nationally, so we can circulate the survey that the Children's Commissioner did. That's no problem at all. Thank you.
That would be a good idea. Thank you. Councillor Trevor Watkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Sally. Yeah, no, it didn't. It's still morning. Seems a long day. Page 60, Sally. It's got on there about the work apprentice scheme. Glad to see that has been put on hold, obviously with COVID-19. Item 4, though, work to the revised guidance of corporate parenting from Welsh Government. That was delayed. Have we got any idea when that's likely to appear or not?
No, we don't. I think it will appear, because I know that quite a lot of work had already been done, but I think it, I suppose, unfortunately, because of the pressures across the public sector, it was something that has fallen. So we await that revised government guidance from Welsh Government. I think it will be with us. It's a priority for Welsh Government, and we're aware of that. And there's a number of organisations who have raised that that needs to happen. So it will happen, when I wouldn't like to say at the moment.
The other question is in regards to, you mentioned you don't get any warning from courts when this happened. Do anybody from social services, the children's section, go to the courts at all?
It's not that we don't get any warning from court. So in relation to the family court, so in care proceedings, we initiate those proceedings. What I meant when I said we don't get any warning is that we don't get warning in terms of the police can phone us with a referral for something they've found now, and we have to respond to that. In relation to the family court, things don't get sprung on us. We initiate with the family court. We're in family court all day, every day.
Good. Okay. The other thing is the Welsh Government funding which you're expecting. Any idea when you're likely to get that, and sort of figures are we talking about? Have we got any ideas?
I understand it's 12.3 million across Wales was in the statement from the Deputy Minister. The statement was released at the end of last week, so I would anticipate that we should hear something towards the end of this week, I would hope. We don't know how much that will be for Newport. My understanding is that it will be done on a formula basis, so okay. It will be, yeah. So exactly how much we get, I don't know yet.
Okay. Yeah. The other thing is, for Paul, really, any idea when the windmill farm is likely to be open? Roughly?
Well, I don't know whether I'm the right person. Obviously, it's gone through planning. Yeah. We've got the funding all in place. I think the architects are working on it now. We're hoping, certainly in the new year, they'll be starting to do a lot of work on it, to be perfectly honest, and especially with Rosedale. Rosedale is November. We're hoping that's going to be open. So really, it's all systems go, really.
Possibly spring, summer next year.
I think we're anticipating August of next year is what we'd be looking at. I think we're hoping that the digging, I don't know what the word you use when you start building work, so that
cutting the turf, isn't it?
Thank you.
On the side, I don't know what they want to do.
So we're hoping that will be in January, and then we're anticipating children hopefully August of next year.
Excellent. Thank you. Well done, the whole service.
Thank you.
Beat me to it, because I have my hand up now, and that was one of my questions. Where were we with windmill? I saw something about the cabinet member for assets and windmill farm recently.
So what did you think alike, Joan?
Sorry?
The Watkinses think alike.
We certainly do sometimes, absolutely. But my second question, Sally, a lot of children have been affected by COVID and looked after children in particular. Where are we in terms of children who are having more than one placement? Where are we with that?
Well, as you can see in the report, we are very slightly above what we set as our target. Yeah. We do have children who have more than one placement. Sometimes it's for very good reasons, and sometimes it's for not such good reasons.
Yes.
I mean, actually, overall, placements were more stable than one might have thought over the period. And I think I mentioned earlier, in some of the work that we've done with foster carers, one of the things that they described is that actually taking some of the pressure off looked after children in terms of school activities, being out and about, actually helped. And it's counterintuitive, but for some of our children, it's given them a window of time to form good attachments with foster carers. So it's one of the things we have to report every week to Welsh Government, and we've not had a single foster placement or residential breakdown because of COVID. We've had breakdowns for other reasons, but not because of COVID, which is interesting. So placement breakdown is there. One of the things that we are working on currently is a service called MIST, which already exists in the rest of Gwent, and we're part of a rollout for MIST, which is a very specialist, not very specialist, it's a very much a highly intensive support service for placements with psychology as part of that. We've just appointed the team manager for that service. That service is funded with integrated care funding, so the funding that comes from Welsh Government as an addition. And we're hoping that we will be starting that service up very, very early in the new year to support placements. So there's some good work, but the COVID period has been very, very mixed in terms of placements for us. Some real sadness, but also some surprising upbeat news in terms of how children and carers have managed during this period.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I don't see any more hands raised. So if there are no more questions.
Can I just raise one point, and just on the foster carers, what Sally initiated earlier on in the year was to give all foster carers a bunch of flowers. Now it was a small thing, but it was so well appreciated by the foster carers, and they've all been in touch with me and thanked people. So it's thanking those people in a small way, but it meant a lot to them, and I think, credit to Sally, that it was a good gesture.
I would say sometimes the small things can have a very big impact.
Yeah.
So well done you, Sally, for that.
And I'll take the praise for getting it sorted and agreeing it, but it was one of our fostering link workers, Lorraine, who actually initiated, and it was her idea, and it was a fab idea. It was a really good idea.
Certainly, I can see that. Well done. So if there are no more questions, can I say thank you very much to Sally and to Paul for attending this morning and for being very open and honest in answering all our questions. Thank you also to our members who have engaged really well today. I hope we'll all go away feeling that we've learnt a lot. Neil, is there anything more that I need to do or say at this point?
No, that's everything, Chair. Councillor Cochrane and Sally are welcome to leave the meeting now if they wish.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, and please be sure to thank all your staff. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we need to look at any issues that we want to research into further. Does anybody feel they want to bring something forward? Please put your hand up. Carmel, I see your pictures come, but I don't see your hand.
It's all right.
Well, it's not a problem. If you have you got something you want to bring forward?
No, Joan, it wasn't anything. I thought we were going to have some element of education in here this morning.
No, Carmel, education will come on the 17th when this committee meets again.
Oh, that's all right, Joan. Yeah.
Education will be the issue that we'll cover on that occasion.
Okay, no, that's fine. Yeah, thank you.
I think we couldn't possibly cover it all in one session today.
It's fairly comprehensive, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Everybody please make a note of that. The 17th of November will be our next scrutiny panel.
Okay.
So, anything you want to take forward, please? Or are you all happy with everything we've heard and learned this morning?
Yeah.
Yep, I can't see any hands up. I was just, we've talked about Windmill Farm. I was just wondering, in terms of something we didn't raise there this morning, but in terms of how the YOS is operating and how COVID has impacted on the work and the children involved there, and also with regard to child exploitation. What does everybody think?
Yeah.
Anybody got any comments?
No.
You know, the children who get into mischief, shall we call it, or into, criminality, are often very vulnerable children, and sometimes children who are being exploited, particularly in terms of, the drug gangs, etc. They then fall under the YOS remit. Any comments?
That's the youth justice system, I think.
Yes.
I think there was a report at the very end of the children's services.
Yes.
In the red.
Yes. I'm saying, should we want to investigate that a little further? My suggestion would be that we have somebody come to panel from the Youth Offending Service to give us, full detail on how they are operating, especially in the current circumstances.
I would agree with you, Chair.
If they can't, then perhaps Sally can do it for them, bring it forward.
Trevor, I don't think there should be any reason. We're doing it all virtually, so there should be no reason why the senior officer who is actually running the YOS shouldn't be able to come to panel and explain how they're operating at this time.
Okay, yes, no
Can
problem.
we make note? Thank you. Can we make a note of that, Neil?
Yeah, sure, I've put that in the notes, Chair.
Excellent. And I can see, Carmel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. When we were talking earlier on with Sally about the effects on young people during the present crisis, Nobody has sort of mentioned the effects on ordinary school children from primary age all the way up. I did write to Sarah a while ago and to the Cabinet Member for Education, reporting that some schools, not in Wales that I know of, but in England, had been practically terrorising children about the COVID situation and basically telling them to inform on their parents as though they were living in Nazi Germany. Sarah said, as she's not...
Can I just say, interrupting you, Carmel, is this something that should come up on the 17th when we've got Councillor Giles and Sarah Morgan?
Yes, I think just to ask the question, Joan, that what exactly is being told to children, because I know children right across the age range and primary school children in particular seem very, very worked up about the situation, you know, about the germs element and just the whole thing that children are not normally bothered by. But I have seen effects on friends' children, and I would just like to know what children are being told in school. You know, I don't think little children should be burdened with the sort of things that we've heard this morning.
Right. Neil, advice here. Should we be putting that as a question in advance of the 17th, or should Carmel raise that on the 17th, please?
Councillor Townsend's more than welcome to put the question by email to Sarah. So when you've already done it, would you like me to chase it up for you, Councillor?
No, because she's replied to me, but it was the Cabinet Member that didn't, and I just wanted us all as a group to know what the situation is right across the board, because it is affecting children's emotional health and you know their mental health as well.
No problem. So I'll see if I can chase this up with the Cabinet Member as well for you.
Yes, but I think it's also you know, a good idea, Carmel, to raise that as well again on the day. Yeah, because you know it would then be a question of sharing it very openly with everybody on this panel and allowing a possibility of questions.
Yes, all right. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Lovely. Anybody else feel there's an issue that we need to look at?
Chairman, just for clarification, Carmel's not suggesting that the Education Authority, I'm not quite sure, did you use the word terrorise?
No, this is reported from, I've read it in connection with an English school, and I won't name it.
No.
I just want to know, Councillor Routley, what the position is, you know, the sort of agreed line is, if you like, right across the schools according to age, whether it's primary, secondary, whether they understand and whether they have been frightened by things that their parents are frightened by, to be quite honest. You know, I just want to know what the situation is and what children are being told.
That's okay. Yeah, I understand that then. Thank you, Carmel.
Yeah. Carmel wasn't saying that the children in schools in Wales or Newport were being terrorised.
No,
it was something she'd learned from elsewhere.
Yeah.
I see, Will, you have your, but that's, oh, now, Councillor Richards, you have your hand up, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just something Carmen said then. She'd raised this issue with the officer. The officer had given her a written reply. Why does she now want the Cabinet Member to appear before us? Isn't that duplication or?
No, because the Cabinet Member will be present anyway. It was just that I would like a sort of fuller report on it rather than, as far as we're aware, or I haven't got it in front of me now, this is not happening in Newport schools. I was particularly referring to the English thing that I mentioned, and they said it's not happening in Newport schools. And I just wanted to know what is being told to children. That's all. It's not confrontational. I just want to know what's happening.
Yeah, could I then ask perhaps that you share your question, your email with the rest of the committee members, and then you share the reply that you've had to date so that we're up to...
Yes, okay, John. Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you.
I'm sure Neil will do that for you, Carmel. But yes, it would be good to know what what the line across schools, what line is being taken
Yes.
in the information that's being given out to children and the support that's been given to them in schools.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Is that okay with you, Neil? Can you do that?
Yeah, that's fine, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, do we need to look at the forward work programme?
Yes, Chair. So as you mentioned, on the 17th of November, education are coming. So we'll have the Cabinet member come in with Sarah Morgan, just discussing education and mid-year service area. And then the next meeting on the 12th of January, we'll be discussing the 2021-22 draft budget proposals.
Yes.
And medium-term financial plan. So coming to that meeting, that'll be the Chief Education Officer and the heads of social services again. They'll all be attending this meeting.
Yes.
And hopefully the strategic director for people as well.
Yes, thank you. Well, I made a few notes in terms of education that I'll just share with everybody. Impact of COVID on finance. I know that Stephen, you included us all in the responses with regard to the supply of free laptops, technical equipment, etc., which was good. I think we need to ask what the impact has been on alternative provision. Mental health is clearly an issue. There's also going to be the issue of exams next year, which at the moment is very much up in the air, as I understand it. And of course, the impact of COVID on service delivery. So they were just a few notes that I made. Does anybody else want to make comment or add anything from today's panel? Or with regard to the panel on this coming on the 17th? Okay, I don't see any hands raised and all is quiet on the Western Front. Neil, can we say we leave it there, please?
Yes, Chair. Thanks for everyone for attending today. All free to go.
I'm coming to that. Don't go before I thank you all. I think we've asked some very, very good questions today. We've been quite, we've been really good at holding to account, and I thank you all for your engagement. So until the 17th, I'll say goodbye, and I hope you all keep well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.